right, welcome to our week 1 asynchronous session for English 11B. I almost said A there, English 11B. We are going to be talking about characterization today. Our objective is posted there at the top. It says to be able to identify characterization and employ the technique to create our own characters. So this is English 11B. We do some literary writing and we do some narrative writing as well. So your first project, which you'll be introduced to in Unit 1 and 2 before you submit it in Unit 3, is a literary narrative, fictional narrative. So we're going to talk about that concept of characterization today and how you can employ characterization to create meaningful characters that your audience can connect to. Before we talk specifically about creating our own characters, we are going to talk about that concept of characterization first. Then we're going to talk about how to determine the difference between direct and indirect characterization, do a little practice with that, and then you'll do an activity to create your own character. All right, so characterization is the way an author develops his or her character by giving him or her a personality and dimension. Characters who change and evolve over the course of the story are going to be our most interesting characters. They are going to be the ones that we can relate to, that we identify with, that we're drawn to when we read. Through characterization, we better understand the physical, emotional, intellectual, and social elements of characters. And as I mentioned, it helps us relate to them and to better understand their stories. There are a variety of different ways that an author can explain a character to us or show a character to us. There's direct characterization and indirect characterization. Now, direct characterization is when an author, it's exactly the way it sounds. It's when an author tells us something directly about the character. This means that there's really no room for interpretation. For example, Charlie is a nice 7-year-old boy with brown hair and green eyes. Excellent. What can you tell me about Charlie? You can tell me that Charlie is nice, he's 7, he's got brown hair and green eyes. The author has given us the specific attributes that he or she wants us to understand about Charlie and directly stated them to us. Indirect characterization is when we learn about the character through his or her actions, comments, or thoughts. What he or she says or does is super indicative of the way we interpret a character, because this shows us the character's personality. So Charlie yelled, "That's my toy and you cannot play with it," as he snatched the truck from his sister's hand. Okay, excellent. So we have Charlie giving us some dialogue, but we have him yelling. We have him grabbing a toy back from his sister and saying, "You cannot play with it." So in your mind, if you were to describe Charlie's character, what word would you use? So think for just a second, and if you were to describe Charlie to somebody based solely on this statement, what might you say? You might say, well, he was selfish because he wouldn't share his toy. He didn't want to let his little sister play with his stuff. And he's kind of rude, right? He yells at her and he grabs it right back from her. So we can describe Charlie based on what he does and what he says and how he says it. That's indirect characterization. All right, so now let's take a look at a couple of other examples from literature to help us better understand the way an author would employ these techniques in writing. But before we pull those up, I want to let you know that the first 2 letters in your access code this week are C, like the letter C, and the second letter is L. C-L. All right, so I'm going to pull up those other characters. Let's take a look at these 2 examples. The first from the Hunger Games Chapter 1 is direct characterization. I don't know if any of you guys have read this story, but this is one of my most favorite stories because the characters are so well demonstrated and I connect with them. Anyway, so the first one is Gale from Chapter 1 of the Hunger Games, and this is direct characterization. It says, "I watch as Gale pulls out his knife and slices the bread. He could be my brother, straight black hair, olive skin, we even have the same eyes." So we don't really learn anything about Gale's personality here, but we do learn about his physical appearance, which is part of characterization, is helping us understand what our characters do look like. So this is an example of direct characterization. The author saying specifically what the character looks like. And a lot of times, this is the way you'll see direct characterization used to just identify a quick character trait or a quick personality trait or a quick physical trait or attribute that the author wants to make note of. The second one is from chapter 2 of The Hunger Games, and I don't know how many of you guys have seen the movie or read the books, but this is the moment in chapter 2 when Katniss Everdeen, who's the main character, steps up and volunteers to go into the Hunger Games for her sister, who had originally been the one chosen. So this is an indirect characterization example because we see some action from Katniss, and we are able to discern some information about her character based on this action. This one says, Prim. The strangled cry comes out of my throat and my muscles begin to move again. Prim. I don't need to shove through the crowd. The other kids make way immediately, allowing me a straight path to the stage. I reach her just as she is about to mount the steps. With one sweep of my arm, I push her behind me. I volunteer, I gasp. I volunteer as tribute. All right, so in this example, this is indirect characterization. We see some action from our main character, and we're able to determine some information about her. This is early on in the book, so we don't really know her very well. So we are able to look at her and say, okay, well, what do we know about this girl? We know that Prim is her little sister. The word strangled cry helps me understand that she's scared or upset in this moment, and that she was working her way through the crowd, possibly needing to shove them if they hadn't moved for her. So she's also acting with some frenzy or some, impatience. And then it says, with one sweep of my arm, I push her behind me. So I don't know if any of you guys ever have a parent in the car or a parent, if you're walking down the street, they might put, my kids call it the mom arm, where you throw your arm out in front of somebody to keep them from going forward. And that's an act of protection, right? So what Katniss is doing is she's sweeping her sister behind her and putting her body between her sister and the danger that's perceived in where her sister was called to. So she's stepping in between what that danger is and her sister. So we can also determine from that action that Katniss is a protective of her family. She's protecting her sister. She cares very deeply for her and is willing to put her body and her safety between the danger and her sister to keep her sister safe. So that's an example of using the clues in the sentences and in the selection to determine an element of her personality. All right, the next two letters in your access code are O and U. Now we're going to move on to something that you're going to work on next. Okay, welcome to our last step of the video. We are going to work on developing our own characters. We're going to practice employing some of those techniques of direct and indirect characterization into our own little write-up of a character. Now, this does not have to be a character that you ever plan to use again, or it can be a character that you've already written about in a story that you've written if you've done that before, but it should be an original character. So I want you to utilize both direct and indirect characterization. Describe the character's physical appearance using direct characterization. What does he or she like to do? What does he or she hate to do? And then what is his or her one flaw or multiple flaws? Maybe they have more than one. Why would we give our character a flaw, you might ask? Well, we don't want any of our characters that we read about or write about to be perfect, because then they are not relatable. We relate to people who are flawed, who are more real. Like, there aren't people who are perfect about everything and in every way. So we want to make sure that they have a flaw that makes them relatable, so that your reader can find a connection with the character. All right, I gave you a little example up there on the screen, and if you have any questions about this, is one of the questions in the quiz that you're going to complete in the class. So you want to, one of these words was stuck together, so I want to fix that really fast. So you're going to work on writing this either in a paragraph form or in a bullet form, and you're going to put it in the quiz when you take it in the class. The last letter in your access code is D, as in dog, not the word dog, but the last letter in the access code is D. And you're going to have this step in your quiz, the last step in your quiz will be to do this exercise that's from the video. So make sure that you remember those 4 questions, or pause it here and complete the the quiz, because these questions aren't actually on the question. So you want to make sure you're aware of what you're supposed to do. All right, thank you for watching this week. First week of our asynchronous session videos. Let me know if you have any questions or if you need any help.